But it is clear to me, it is clear to you. I am in Ukraine, you've been to Ukraine, you know all the ins and outs, but what about the Western audience? Like the Russian propaganda wires has been cut, and like no Sputnik anymore, and no RTVI and everything. And what are the sources of truth for these audiences in the West?
Well, they are first, look, the media even in my lifetime and in recent years has become an awful lot more complex. So if you look at Russia, it's very easy for the Kremlin to have great information control because television in Russia is massively influential. In the West, we have a far greater multitude of channels. The mainstream media, however, is still very, very influential. And, we need to look at how, social media and the various channels is also influential. And very often, social media reflects what is in the mainstream media, certainly in the West. And in work that I did in the British Cabinet Office back in 2018, when I was advising on Russian disinformation, and we were dealing with the aftermath of the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury. We looked very, very carefully at Russian disinformation and how the media and social media were consuming this. One of the things that we found in 2018 was that the Kremlin, but this was a dedicated unit in the UK Foreign Office, the Kremlin put out no less than 47 different false narratives to explain the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal. These ranged from Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, did it. The CIA did it. The mother-in-law did it. There was even a story. The UK chemical weapons research facility, Porton Down, is actually situated very close to the city of Salisbury. And one story was the Novichok simply blew in on the wind from Porton Down. This was how it happened. 47 false narratives, each one more ridiculous than the last. And what we did, we monitored the media very closely. And what I've got to tell you we found was that despite the amount of traffic and the amount of noise on social media, where the big influence was still coming was the mainstream media and the main news channels of BBC, of ITV, of Channel 4, of Channel 5. These were the ones that were really influential. And in fact, in terms of that information battle, and I was a very small part of it as an advisor when I came back from Ukraine, but the British government very much won that information battle because I think we established that well over 80% of the UK population accepted the British government narrative, which was obviously the narrative of the Ukrainian government and the other allies and everybody who was very, very clear from early on that this assassination was carried out by GRU agents. But it's about, I think that brings us back to the mainstream media is still important. It's not the channels in communication are important. What's important in communication is leadership.
Just leadership.
And, it's the little people like me up to the big people like Volodymyr Zelensky and everybody in between who is telling the same story. And one of the conversations I used to have when I was in Ukraine, because, I was a special communication advisor to the foreign minister, but in my time, I ended up working with 4 other cabinet ministers and 5 ministries. And one of the conversations that I used to have with some very bright, good people was, but look, Cormac, if Russia is doing this, we should do it back, i.e., if they're using disinformation, we should use disinformation against them. And I always argued very clearly, no, we have got to keep the moral high ground. We have got to convince the world that we are, in as far as possible, we are truthful that what we tell is the truth, because otherwise what Russia wants, Russia, remember, does not fight for truth. Russia does not fight for any one truth. They use what they call a fire hose, what we in the West, in the UK government, call a fire hose of falsehoods. So many different stories, like 47 false narratives, that you just confuse everyone so nobody knows what to believe, so they believe nobody. I think over the last 2 years, I think since the start of this war, I think a lot of people's eyes have opened. I think people, and I'm talking about right up to the top levels of government, I think people are now far more aware of the nature of how Russia conducts diplomacy and how Russia lies. I told you I was in a meeting in Vilnius in 2018, and a German diplomat and a French diplomat, I was pushing very, very hard to get everybody to cooperate on a pan-European communication campaign that would basically tell people that Russia lies on an industrial scale. That phrase, which I keep using over and over again, Pavlo Klimkin used it. I use it over and over again still. And I was told by several colleagues around the table, we cannot use language like that. That will offend Russia. We must keep talking to Russia. That was 2018. I think we have moved in most European capitals, maybe with the exception of Hungary. I think we have moved far, far beyond that. The scales have fallen from people's eyes. People have no choice but to realize what we are dealing with. But still, the problem with democracy is you've got to get everybody to agree with you. Everybody has a say. So, there are 27 member states to the EU. There are how many? Help me out. I think 30 member nations in NATO.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe so.
Yeah. So, getting all these people on the one page is a very, very big challenge, because we are dealing with democracies. And this is where I come back to the fact that Russia uses our democratic values against us. Now, I think we have all seen far greater. I think Putin and the Russians will have been surprised and shocked by the amount of cohesion and unity that they have seen from NATO and the European Union and some other allies in the West as well. We have, I believe, come a long, long way. So, an independent commentator like me, and I'm not a civil servant anymore. I couldn't do this if I was. I can speak exactly as I wish. I put my own rules on myself. My first rule is I will do my best to be informative but honest at the same time. Because if I'm not honest, and if I start purveying lies that I think might help Ukraine, I ultimately lose credibility, and I'm no better than Russia. My second rule is that on every opportunity, I will bust Russian lies. And my third one is I will put my hands up and say, look, I'm not neutral. I'm a friend of Ukraine. My job, and the reason I do this, is to advocate for Ukraine and to try and explain to people. But I will do that honestly. So I think we have made real progress. But I think we need to, it's very easy for me, sitting in my office, my home office in London, to say, arm Ukraine to the teeth, sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. And I've been saying that for 16 months. But I also recognize, from my time as a senior civil servant and a diplomat, and from my life experience, that the reality of getting 30 major democratic nations to come together, and all of those leaders are looking over their shoulder at the next election. This is really hard. Russia, Putin does not deal with that. He's a dictator. He's an autocrat. He has absolute power. So in a way, this is a handicap that we deal with, but we will keep dealing with it because it's the price we pay for our democracies and our freedom. But I think it's important to realize, I don't want to sound like I'm just criticizing America and my own government and every other government for not doing enough. I don't think we've done enough soon enough. I think we have done it earlier, but I think we also need to be realistic and understand just how hard it is to get that unity among up to 30 democracies.
The war helped. Don't get me wrong. It's a terror. It's awful. But all the plans, all Putin plans, have gone wrong. He planned, he said that he feared of NATO. Now he must be fearing of Ukraine. What is the point of this? What do you think could be the point now to continue this war for the Kremlin? I mean, everything is falling apart.
Look, Putin's only concern is himself and his own position, his own wealth, and his own safety.
Power.
But Putin, I've said already, and you know, Henry, what Putin fears most is the Russian people. It's what any Russian leader in history fears most is the Russian people. And is he losing his grip on the Russian people? Are there cracks appearing in the Kremlin regime? Has he got opposition from Kadyrov or from Prigozhin or from others that we maybe don't know of? Well, we can only hope, but I am not going to be the one to jump to those conclusions and say, as somebody put out a report which got thousands of retweets, that Shoigu had issued a command to shoot all Wagner members, including Prigozhin, on sight. And somebody sent this to me, a former diplomat has sent this to me and said, have you seen this? And I said, well, I don't believe it. Where's the source? And I did a bit of digging around, and somebody came back and said, this guy has form of making stuff up just to get the clicks, just to get the, so this is dangerous. So no, every time I hear that Putin has problems with his health, every time I hear that Putin is under pressure, in the back of my mind, I think, I hope so, but am I going to bank on it? No, I don't think it's something we can bank on at all. I think Putin has an absolute iron grip on the Russian people and on the machinery of the Russian state. One thing I learned from sport, I used to be a competitive athlete in my younger years. And in sport, whether you're playing rugby or I was a javelin thrower, or I was believe it or not, I was an international bobslayer at World Cup level. And the one thing you do is you don't spend all your time worrying about your opposition, because you can't really change what they do unless you want to break the rules and sabotage their equipment or something. You can't. You've just got to you've got to focus on your own game, and I think that's what Ukraine has to do and what Ukraine is doing. And those of us who are friends of Ukraine, who do what little we can I try and fight in the information space, because this is an information war. And I try and honestly convince people of the truth and make people understand how Russia lies. But actually, we need to just focus on what we can do best. I believe the stronger we are with Russia, the more they will back down. But more importantly, I think this applies even more so to China. And China is watching. And if we were to allow Russia succeed in Ukraine, this gives great encouragement to China's ambition with Taiwan. It also gives great encouragement to China, say, well, it looks like it's safe for us to go in and to go all in our support of Russia, because when it comes right down to it, the West will do so much, but they back off. They're afraid of the fight. So I really, really believe that the answer to this is absolute commitment and strength by the Western alliance, by all of us. I see no other way out of it, because the only other way out of it is backing down to a bully, and that never ends well. We're not going to be left alone in my beautiful home in central London and my wonderful life. I'm not going to be left alone. This wolf will come to our door if it's not stopped. And, I go back to something, and it was very poignant. In December of 2021, Alexei Reznikov, about the 21st, just before Christmas, I think it was about the 21st of December, Alexei Reznikov, for viewers, Ukraine's Minister of Defense, was interviewed by CNN, and he said very clearly, he said, we do not expect or want your boots on the ground. Just give us the weapons we need and we will do our own fighting. That was 2 months before Russia further invaded. By God, how much more do the Ukrainian people need to prove to us how they can fight and how resilient they are? We cannot, and this is, I'm talking to every man, woman, and child across Europe who may listen to this. How can we let the Ukrainian people down? If you don't, and if somebody out there doesn't have the heart and the moral compass for this,
absolutely.